Hey guys, and welcome to this week's Hobby Tips. So this week I thought we'd take a look at glue. Since I've been starting this series, we've gone through, wet palettes and dry palettes and brushes and clippers, and I figured, well, can't leave out glue. Gotta get in the glue, right? So it's one of the most important parts of, the miniature hobby. You can't, some would argue maybe even more important, because without glue the miniatures don't stand up, and yeah, you might say paint, but if it's all in bits it's not really going to be very interesting. So you need that glue to put it together. Even grey models are better than unassembled ones, right? So we have a few in front of us here, so I thought I'd just go through some of the basics of it, and just give you an idea of what you're going to be tackling if you're new, and even if you're sort of intermediate and you may have only used one type or this or that. This will just give you a bit of an overview of what you want to have, in your collection, I guess. So to start with, we have the most obvious one. I think everyone knows what this is: super glue or metal glue. It'll be called a bunch of different names in your country, but super glue is a pretty common one for it. And this type of glue is what you're going to use to glue a lot of things together. It's mostly designed for things where it's, so if you've got resin kit models, metal models, pewter, anything like that, or where plastic is going to glue to other surfaces, or metal, if you're going to pin something, with a bit of wire through it, you'll use super glue, anything like that. And it's really great. It's been around forever in miniature building or model building. But it is also toxic. You have to watch the fumes. You get on your hands. You got to clean it off. You do have to be careful with it, because it's not a glue that's like very user friendly. Well, most glues aren't, but this one particularly, got to be careful. We don't want to get in your eyes, don't want to get in your mouth, all that kind of thing. Hopefully no one's chewing on this, but you don't, obviously more about like not letting like little kids near it, or your animals, your pets, because it is pretty toxic stuff. But in small amounts, like when you're doing this, you can control it and you can use it to glue your models together. And so you're definitely going to want that. Now the next one on the rack, we'll come back to different qualities and so on. We've got some poly cement here, and this is what people call like plastic glue, and it's purely designed to glue plastic to plastic. So it won't glue resin or metal or any other type of material. It'll only glue plastic. And what it does is it melts the plastic together, so it fuses it and becomes one piece. It's a very strong bond, much stronger than super glue if you're going to be doing that on plastics. So we'll come back to that in a second. And then over here we've got some PVA glue, or wood glue, and that's used on bases and doing, when you're gluing down sand and things like that. This is great stuff. Everyone should have it. It's nice and cheap and easy to use, and it's water-based, so that's and it's pretty non-toxic generally. Most of them do say it on there. So this one has non-toxic on there. Very easy, very user-friendly, and it's safe to be around, the younger ones and your pets. And then we've got this here. Now I've got these, which I guess aren't necessarily glues, but are things that you would use in the place of glue in certain situations. So we've got varnish here. So this is some testers. This is their dull coat, or they call it clear coat now, I think, but it's like their dull matte finish one. And then we've got some art coat here from Citadel, a little pot of varnish. So why do we have these? Well, these days people like to use a lot of pigments and stuff like that for basing material, to sort of do that sort of dusty base, or rust, or these types of things. And if you're putting down pigments on bases, you need to seal it with something. So most people will use varnishes through an airbrush, or you can spray it, those type of things. So I just thought I'd throw it in there as another way of adhering something down. So you won't always use these glues, you might use that. In the good old days, we used PVA glue for everything. You'd glue all the sand, everything down with this, and then you'd seal it with this as well. But these days, a lot of people will actually seal it with varnishes, and that's fine. You can do whatever you like. I'm old school, so I still do the old PVA glue method. This is nice and user-friendly, as I said, non-toxic, and I would prefer to do that. But in some cases, this might be a better choice. I can imagine this would be a good choice if you're trying to glue down very fine particles of that dust and those pigments. You probably do need to use this through an airbrush. But if you're doing that sort of stuff, you definitely need to have a mask, because this stuff is very, very toxic. you know, you can't just use that indoors and so on. You've got to have a well ventilated area, all that kind of stuff, because you are dealing with quite toxic fumes, especially the spray can. But even if you're just doing this varnish through an airbrush, you definitely need to have mask on. So there are things to consider, but we'll put that aside now because they're not really the glues. But I would definitely recommend having some of this stuff in your arsenal, because it is going to become in handy, not just for gluing, but for general, you know, protecting your models and so on. So definitely some testers is great. You saw the price in Australia, around $15. Wherever in your country, it'll be a similar price. And, you know, a little pot of varnish or whatever that you can put through an airbrush, that's always useful as well. And then obviously the PVA glue, which is nice and cheap, and that's great for doing. I would start out with this. I wouldn't use this for gluing and stuff. I would just use this for most of your basing when you start out, because it's nice and easy to do. But the main two culprits, we've got these two, and why you would go. In this case, I've got both, and the pricing on these. So the plastic glue here is, you know, similar price to the testers here. It's usually around about $12 or so in Australia, something like that, $10, whatever. And it's amazingly good and spreads very far, and you know, it's just great stuff. The super glue, generally you can pick up pretty cheap super glue at most craft shops and, you know, places like that, $2 shops, and it's literally like $2 for a little pack like this. You can also get your model glue places and stuff like that, model glue brands of super glue, but they're going to be more expensive. Now, in terms of qualities, those model brands are good, and they'll have different consistencies, like very thin to very thick, and that's always good. But what I've found with those brands is that the nozzles really suck on them. They're just really bad, and they end up getting clogged, and they don't work very well. So I would rather just spend a couple of dollars on a cheap one and use it through until it's dead, and then just get another one and do that, because the ends just end up getting stuffed really easy on super glue, and I find that you end up wasting huge amounts of those bigger, more expensive packs of glue. They're I guess more cost effective, but I can never seem to get them to last through the whole pack. I always end up losing half of it, so I tend to just get these. So when you're starting out, I would just recommend getting some of these cheap ones and just using that. But if you do want to go to those bigger ones, they are good, but for the life of me, I can't get them to I really can't get them to last, so I just use these. This one's already dead as well. This is hard, so I've already got to throw that out. I've used about half of it, so at least I've only lost $1, you know, rather than like, you know, $8 or whatever. So that's generally how I do it. So definitely some of that. Start off cheap and work your way up. But this one's the real winner. As we know, most of the hobby these days, at least if you're with Warhammer stuff, is plastic, and I would definitely recommend getting yourself some of this poly cement. And I actually really like this brand, this Revel. This is really great. It has like a nice needle on it, and it's really good for doing precision work. And if it gets clogged, you can just use a lighter and heat the end. You've got to be very careful. Don't do that at home, kids. Have an adult or someone around. But it can get clogged in here, so you can release that. But if you're going to do something like that, be very careful. Have a mask on. The fumes that come off this are actually quite toxic, so do it outside or something like that. But you can see I've already done it there. But it will unclog it if it gets clogged. That's the only downside of this, is that it can clog up. But yeah, be very careful with that, and do it outside with a mask. But yeah, this is a really great one, and you know, gluing plastic together with poly cement is so much better. Now, you might get people arguing, no, super glue them together so you can break them apart again, and, you know, if you need to work them again. But really, I mean, you know, they're just so much more solid. I mean, if you have a look here, you know, like it's great. You know, it's not coming apart. And for me, I love gluing them all down with the plastic glue, so they're adhering to plastic on plastic, and then do all the basing around them. But if you really love doing the basing separate, then obviously you're going to have to use super glue to glue them to the base, with probably a pin or something like that. But I'm very old school, so I love just gluing all these together first, as you can see here with this one, more finished one. You can see on the basing there, and the reason why I love that is that you get a better grounding. The feet to the ground, it looks like they're one thing. They're really standing on that surface. Whereas a lot of the time, if you do these separate and then super glue it down and whatever, it often looks like the models are floating. They're not quite grounded on that surface, if you understand what I mean. Like you can see the gravel all around the feet there, and it sort of feels like it's planted, you know. And when you dry brush it up and when you paint it, you're affected by where the feet are, so you get a varying of color and tone nearing where the feet are, and it gives you a bit of shadow there, and I just find that's a lot more pleasing to look at. But you know, each to their own, but definitely what I would recommend is you know, getting some of this polycement. It lasts for a long time, it's great value, and yeah, you can't go wrong with it. So that's where I would begin. You know, a good quality one like that, spend a bit more on this, a little bit less on this, and get yourself some of that from a craft shop. And then I guess the varnishes are the next stage if you're going to use pigments and other sorts of powders or finer grain stuff for your basing. But otherwise, that's it. So hope you've enjoyed this, hope this helps just understand some of the differences here, and you can utilize some of the information for yourself. And otherwise, have a great day, and I guess hit that subscribe button and notify button if you like what you see here, and it really helps me out. But otherwise, I'll catch you on the next one.